Good afternoon and welcome to the latest installment of the Alumni Workplace Engagement Business Forum. My name is John Borghese. I'm Director of Alumni Workplace Engagement for the Rutgers University Alumni Association in partnership with the University Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all to this outstanding program. We have a dynamic panel of subject matter experts that I believe you will take at least one outstanding idea or thought back to your organizations. And at this time, I'd like to introduce this esteemed panel. It will be moderated by our VP for Advancement Solutions and Talent Management for the Rutgers University Foundation, Tahsin Alam. Welcome, Tahsin. And on the panel, we have three very outstanding alumni. I should mention Tahsin is a fourth alum as well. So we have four outstanding alumni here with us. We have Jen Ughetta, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Talent Officer for Global Retail Markets for Liberty Mutual Insurance. Unfortunately, she was unable to get Lee Mew, the Emu, and Doug to join her, but we're excited. We're excited to have Jen. We have Deb Hughes, who is the Senior Vice President, Transformation Communications and Change Management Human Resources for ADP. And third, we have Willie Grant, Vice President of HR, Enabling Functions for Bristol Myers Squibb. So at this point, I'd like to welcome you all and look forward to an outstanding program. Tahsin, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deb, Willie, Jen. Lovely to have you all here. Goodness, I mean, I was thinking about today and our conversation, and I honestly, I think between the four of us, we've been in this area of work for several decades if we combine it together, but I can't remember the last time internal communication for staff has been at such a premium, which for the most part we are proud of, but it has taken a lot of adjustment for us over the last 12, 14 months. So talk to me a little about that, and let's talk about it in context, which is how did our organizations react, respond, and communicate after yesterday's verdict that came out as well. So I think that's two things that are omnipresent in our mind nowadays. So I'm gonna, since just we're in a Zoom setup, I'm gonna go to Deb first and see if Deb, you'd like to start us off.
Yeah, I think everyone was probably glued to their iPhone, to the TV, to everything that you could imagine just to understand what was going to happen. And we were prepared either way because we care about our associates and we know we care. And we know they care, and we know that they want us to care about what happened. So we really had more of a communication at the leadership level to be clear about what our position was going to be. And we do work with a business roundtable on that as well. And we just made sure that our leaders were there listening to our associates. We had recently rolled out something called Leading with Heart, and it contains really an opportunity for scripts so that leaders who are not sure how to start a conversation, that they have scripts. It's called Messages That Matter. So we reinforce what those scripts were, and to give people an opportunity to leverage those to have the conversations that they wanted to have with their teams. So that's how we ended it. I will tell you that last night there was a lot of relief and support, but we continue to be on point here because we're not through this, right? We have a lot ahead of us here. So that helps.
And corporations are getting more involved in helping to shape that dialogue as well internally. And you're writing a line between communication and education. Willie, tell us a little bit about how your organization rides that line as well, if it does.
Yeah, sure. Very similar to Deb. So we have a standby statement at the leadership level. We call it our GLT, our global leadership team, which is roughly 300 of our top executives around the world. So we have a standby statement. We've given them talking points to be able to engage their teams. We've encouraged them to engage their teams as appropriate as well. We've engaged what we call our Global Diversity Inclusion Council as well. So they are on point, as well as what we have 8 what we call PBRGs, or people and business resource groups. So some call them affinity groups, some call them employee resource groups. We call them PBRGs, and we've engaged them as well to put them on point as their members may want to reach out to their leadership teams as well.
Yeah, yeah. And Jen, how is
Yeah.
both internally for you, but also with you, let me ask about external clients as well. How is this communication happening today?
Yeah, so maybe just, Deb, I love your, what did you say, leading with heart. I mean, I think I've done this more times, made the little heart symbol more times this past year than I have ever. But I feel like this whole situation, one, you know, where all of this social unrest and injustice that's happening at the same time that we're going through a pandemic has just made our leaders really have a responsibility, understand their responsibility of leaning in and really being empathetic. So I want to answer just, I'll get to the external piece, but I want to answer one piece that I think is just additive to what the discussion was, which is one of the things that we really did to lean into the organization and help our leaders lead through it was we started having panels with the CEO, driven by our CEO, and folks within our organization when a situation arose. And so, you know, I was a part of a panel when we had the with George Floyd to begin with, because you know, I have a situation where I've raised my nephew who identifies as a Black man, and I'm married to a retired police officer. And so I have a perspective that I wanted to share about it being sort of a both and being supportive of both communities when it felt really split as a society. And so what we were trying to do with that is create this open dialogue where it's, you know, we're meeting people where they are. Everybody has feelings about these things. You don't have to hide them and keep them from work, but how do we create a constructive way to have conversations? And then those have been really powerful moments and have opened dialogue up in the organization. I'd say from an external perspective, I don't think we do a lot of external communication around things like that, but we have put some of our things out on LinkedIn and started to, we're kind of a quiet organization in terms of how we handle things internally, but we have put some of our messaging out on LinkedIn and such.
And these CEO interviews, Jen, are they, or dialogues, how are you doing it now in a pandemic setting? And then fast forward a year from now in a hopefully post-pandemic world, do we continue? Does this continue to become a chief people officer responsibility? Can employees expect that in the future? What are your thoughts on that? Not specific to Liberty, but your thoughts in general.
Yeah, you know, as a global organization, if you think about the pandemic in general, like we needed to all quickly move to a virtual environment. And I was really pleased with how quickly we were able to do that. We had already been pretty far along on our journey of, you know, people being able to work from home. And when you're global, you have virtual meetings all the time. I think we got a lot better at it. But the pandemic allowed us to do it and meet a larger audience. I don't know that we would have done a forum that anybody could dial into anywhere from around the world before the pandemic, but we think different. We think broader and bigger now, and the audience is bigger because it's easy. You know, you're not trying to figure out how many people can get in the room and renting a facility and all of those things. It's just, you can quickly pull something together and touch a whole lot of people in a short period of time.
I feel like we've all had to learn how to become deputy chief communication officers all of a sudden and get the message right for such large audiences. Speaking of, one of the many things I was looking forward to doing in this conversation is me not receiving the following question, which is, what is the future of telecommuting, and how do you think organizations are going to adapt? I'm usually on the receiving end of that. So I'll let any of you take that one in terms of, you know, what is the future of work? What do you predict under the best of circumstances?
So I'm happy to kick that off. I'm in the camp of, I believe that we learned how to do things differently as a result of the pandemic. We've learned that we're more agile than we knew, we can be more flexible than we thought. And even, we started having these conversations maybe 6 months in, so summer of last year, having conversations around what does the future look like? What is the go back? What is our new normal? And I think our thinking 6 months ago or 9 months ago is very different than it is now in terms of challenging our own assumptions. I think we're in a place that we say now, if we go back to exactly the way we were before, then we've missed an opportunity to learn and grow, because there's some richness and some closer communication and connection that has come out of going through all of this together. Our engagement survey results for senior leadership trust is up 12% it went up 12 points in 2020. So that means that we're doing something really well in leaning in and putting people first and living that value, which is one of our core values. So I'm in the camp of, we've got to figure out what flexible means for us in the future. And it doesn't mean going back to exactly where we were. I think we will have people who are fully virtual. I think we will have people who need to be in the office. Like we are helping to create guidelines around core principles that we believe in as an organization, and then let leaders have some tools to figure out what it means for them. But I think flexibility is going to be a key, because we want to come out of this better than we were.
If I may, Willie, ask you a quick question. But there are sincere limitations, right? You're in a pharma. There are some things that just cannot be done. How do we maintain equal opportunity of options for everyone? How do we make that balance, and how do we make that decision as to what job class gets to have the option and which one doesn't?
Thank you for the question. So we've been very clear with our workforce that I'm going to use the word never, and I should never use never. We won't be 100% remote, right? That's just the nature of our work, the collaboration that's needed. Whether you're a bench scientist or you're in the what we call our GPS organization, getting medicine to patients, we'll never be 100% remote. We've been very clear, though, that, as Jen said, what this has created was opportunities to be much more flexible, right? And so we want to make sure that we are supporting our employees, meeting them where they are from a flexibility standpoint. We are readdressing our remote work and our flexible work policy, if you will, where we're saying you just need to be in office 50% of the time. Once we get back to whatever new normal is, right? We get back in the office 50% of the time. And that's a discussion that you will have with your direct manager on what 50% means, right? But our going in is that we will continue to add flexibility or create flexibility for our workforce, but not 100% remote. It goes back to something I was thinking about years ago, right? It's that old term of that kind of freedom within a framework, right? So you want to create the framework for the organization, but make sure there's freedom and flexibility within that framework as to meet employees where they are from a work perspective as well as a home and life perspective.
Yeah. Deb, this must be an interesting thought in a conversation in your office, because I think and forgive me for if I'm making an erroneous assumption, but ADP related work could potentially be completely remote. Who knows? But there could also be complete need to be in the office. How is ADP thinking about it?
Yeah, well, that was one heck of an assumption. Just saying, we actually have quite, to a certain extent, we have an opposite view, but I agree with Jen and Willie in the sense that we learned a lot about our ability to work remotely. We took 58,000 people around the globe, did it. But as we think about a couple of things, one thing is, we have what we call an intact team model, meaning we have people who are co-located and they support a client or they support a set of clients. And that really is such a successful model. We know that because of what the clients tell us, right? That's what's important there. But at the same time, all of our associates, their lives changed completely over this last year in many ways that we don't even know. But we know that they've had to figure out how to work from home effectively, and they've done it extraordinarily well for almost over a year now. So now what we're thinking about is how do we leverage those lessons learned, but keep with what we know is a winning model, which is that intact team concept, knowing that if you read all the headlines, and I'm a big one, I keep telling people, don't just read the headlines, actually read the whole article, because they're reading headlines that say, oh, they're going to be 100% remote. I'm like, no, they just bought a city block with a big building. They're not going to be all remote, but it might look different, right? We may have more flexibility. We may transition, to Willie's point, 2 to 3 days a week at first in the office, and allow people that opportunity to kind of like, what was it like? What did I miss? Oh, that's right. I miss being able to see my team. I miss being able to talk to people. I miss being able to, talk to my coworker about a business problem I had. And so that's really the journey we're on right now, is how do we bring our associates back more to the office, less than before, but do that in a way that's thoughtful and compassionate, because everybody had to go through an incredible change, and it would be an incredible change to bring people back. Hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, but Deb, if I could stay on you for just a moment,
Yeah.
yours is also a global organization, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
How is this working across cultures? How do we anticipate? I'm sure there are folks that have joined us tonight that are part of larger organizations that are global. How do we connect those dots?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think our go forward strategy is going to be looking at the domestic U.S. in a certain way, because we know state by state there's all different expectations about building capacity and whether or not people can come back, et cetera. But outside the domestic U.S., I mean, each country has their own governmental regulations about how they will see. In fact, in France, for example, right now, we're actually required to give people 1 day in the office because of the mental health issues that these countries are facing. We see it ourselves with our own associates. It's a whole different campaign we can talk about later about it's okay. But the point is that, we have to look at this by a country by country perspective. The good news is we're seeing countries like Singapore, China, Australia, right? Where things are getting better, and they're seeing that new normal ahead of them. But we're still thinking about how do we offer similar flexibility in those countries, and we're just allowing that to be more that freedom in the framework that Willie was talking about. I love freedom in the framework, one of my favorite expressions.
Yeah, you touch on a really important topic, Devin. In fact, the question just came up from the audience is, I feel like we have also had to step up, quite rightly so, in the last 14 months on take a very serious look at things like psychological health, burnout, learning how to use your vacation time in a time which is odd and impossible to take time away from. What's the latest thinking? And maybe Jen, I can turn to you first. What's the latest thinking on the type of the mental health support that we can and should and will be offering now and in the future? What's been effective for you?
Yeah, it's such an important topic, and it's a topic that has the stigma associated with it that makes it hard because people feel isolated and they don't feel necessarily safe to talk about it. Towards the end of last year, we were feeling a lot of burnout from folks, and we were seeing it and hearing it. We did a bit of I don't want to call it a campaign, but we worked really hard with our leaders to lean in. We talk about a concept of the shadow of the leader. And so, what is the shadow you're casting as a leader, right? And so if I'm not really taking my vacation, if I'm just going to call in for these 3 important meetings from the beach or wherever, if I'm answering emails on weekends and nights, what does that message send to my organization? And so, we sort of held up that mirror to our leaders and said, you can create a different expectation for your team if you model what it's okay for them to do. It might not even be your preference. You might be the person that likes to get things done at different hours and stuff, but you have to be purposeful about sharing that. Otherwise, people assume that that's sort of what is expected of them, and it leads to burnout. So we sort of did a work around that. We've tweaked some of our work hours so that we give people some space and some breathing room. We try to go light on like Fridays so people can catch up and not have a lot of meetings. But we leaned in from a DEI perspective and started a new employee resource group, which is our group for disabilities. It includes mental health and sort of like invisible challenges that people have. And so, and that just kicked off and was this wonderful video with our CEO talking to a couple of employees who have battled anxiety and depression and isolation, and taking the stigma out of it and saying it's okay. These are leaders in our organization who are facing these same challenges. We're here to help you. There's resources. There's obviously resources within the benefits of the organization, but really bringing it to the forefront and saying it's okay. Let's talk about it, and helping our managers see it, understand it, know how to like get people help and stuff.
Yeah, Willie, do you see any, was there any strategy that you used in your organization that may have increased the utilization of these available services? That's what keeps me up at night. I might have all of the resources available for my staff, but are they using it, and do they know how to go about getting those resources? So any wisdom from your side of the house?
If the answer is where we started this discussion, right? It's communicate, right? We started talking and incorporating well-being into our discussion back in 2018. We were actually revising our people strategy, and it became clear at that point in time that we needed to evolve our people strategy, ensure that we're being very deliberate about our people strategy. And what that created was an opportunity for us to look at all of our programs and then decide how do we ensure that our employees know that they're out there. And it started with creating a global EAP program. It was only US and Puerto Rico only. We made it global and we communicated that. And I was reflecting when a minute ago, I recall a conversation I had with a colleague years and years ago with another company, and we were talking about a global EAP program. He was our regional leader, HR leader in Asia, and he said, "I don't even know what that is." Right? Because sometimes in different countries, at that point in time, there was just a stigma around EAP and getting help, right? And to where we are now, having a global EAP program and tracking utilization and metrics and making adjustments as necessary and as appropriate. We've communicated. We call them quiet weeks. So we're going to have quiet weeks where literally the 30,000 employees at Bristol, you're all working, but we're going to limit meetings. We're going to limit phone calls. It's about getting work done, kind of unplugging a wheel from the Zoom and Microsoft Teams hamster wheel that we're all on. We've instituted quarterly. We call them day of rest, where we literally shut down 30,000 employees, right? And they get 1 day a quarter where we just shut the company down so that everyone is not working all at the same time. And we communicate that. We communicate it in our town halls. We communicate it. We do weekly, we call As I See It meetings with our leadership team. And during that discussion, whether it's not just the CHRO those having those conversations, the CEO, it's our general counsel, they're talking about employee well-being. They're trying to model it. And things similar to Jen was saying, we have quiet Fridays, right? And so the expectation that from noon on, you shouldn't have meetings. Now it's a challenge, right? Because our noon is not necessarily Europe's noon, right? And so we have to be mindful that Friday afternoon is different around the world. And we really, again, continue to communicate that and be respectful of our global colleagues.
It's amazing how so many CEOs and presidents have been willing to step up and be vulnerable. And there is there's hidden work behind that folks in our line of work are doing in the background. How would any of you advise those on this call for whom they may not have a CEO or a president who is willing to be vulnerable? How do we reach out to them? How do we get them to come to this concept of the chief empathy officer being a little more open and willing to talk? And I'll let any of you take that one.
So it's interesting. I'll go first.
Mm-hmm.
I would consider I love our CEO. I think he's fantastic. I love him as a human. But you wouldn't see him as somebody who would open up a lot. He will tell you he's a flaming introvert. So when we get him to speak, he's kind of, and he does it all the time. He speaks all the time. He speaks very well. But he's like that traditional introvert, nervous before he shows up, and then shows up and does amazingly. And you're like, what the heck, right? He got up in a recent global town hall. So we have virtual town halls for 58,000 associates. And he was talking about this concept of it's okay. And one of the things that he said was, listen, I consider myself very blessed. I have a great life. And I reinforce that with my son. I have a teenage son. And whenever he tries to complain, I tell him, stop complaining. He said, then my son wrote me a letter. And he told me how hard it was to talk with me about what he was missing. That he was missing his friends at school. He was missing being at school. He was missing sports. And Carlos shared that with 58,000 associates. And he said, you know what it reminded me of? It's okay for my son to do that. And I need to listen. And I expect all of us to listen. I expect myself to listen to you. And it was really, it's those moments that matter that make everything we do. I mean, if it's not consistent with everything else you do as leaders, then that one moment's maybe not be as pivotal. But if it is consistent and your CEO is standing there on the platform sharing a personal story that way, I think that makes a difference.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, and Deb is referencing her CEO, Carlos Rodriguez. He's been the CEO there since 2011. Jen,
He'll be so mad I was talking about him.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing. My CEO is going to kill me.
Don't tell him.
He is, of course, a flaming introvert. So yeah, don't tell him. Jen, it seemed to evoke a story in your mind when Deb was talking. With regards to CEOs.
I think so. I would say with my leadership team in global retail markets, we've spent a few years now on this journey of we call it our leadership journey, and sort of who we are and how we show up and how we align as a leadership team and how we have courageous conversations and we put ourselves out there and bring our whole selves. We do an exercise at the beginning of our any meeting we have together, which is a check-in that says, like, how am I doing? Like, am I feeling good today? And we get pretty personal. Like, I've told some really personal things because it's how I show up. My husband had heart surgery recently. Everybody I work with knows that. And I don't know that would have always been the case, but they know it now. And it's the first start of every conversation. How's Steve doing today? And it makes you feel like you're connected in a different way. But you don't flip a switch and go from not being an organization that doesn't do that to an organization that does that. It's a journey and it's work. And, people who are uncomfortable with that, dip their toe in the water and they test it out and they see what kind of reaction they get and they give a little more next time and a little more next time. And so I would just say, we've been on a journey for a few years to build that. So when we came into crisis mode, we had already built a lot of that muscle to be able to put ourselves out there and empathize and listen in a different way. So it yielded good results for us to have gone through the work earlier.
That's fantastic. Let's fast forward, Jen, 6 months. Let's fast forward 6 months from now. we are in some sort of future state, and where we have a mix of in office, not in office. That brings with it a new set of dynamics in the office, right? Which is, can you expect a telecommuting colleague to be in person for a meeting? Where are we with continuing to try to maintain those mentorship opportunities, those learning opportunities? There's so much learning that's done in a room just as much as it's done remotely. And again, I know I'm putting all of you on the spot with a future predictor that drives me crazy as well, but do we see us being the ones who set those parameters, kind of going back to what Willie said, or are we going to develop a framework and just hope that people can work within that framework?
Yeah, we made a purposeful decision that wasn't going to be dictated by the talent organization, that we were going to help the organization think through the journey. We probably started with more of like persona work and what kind of personas need to be more collaborative, need to be in the office. How often do they need to be in the office? And we've shifted a bit. I mean, that was useful exercise for us. And now we're thinking more of like, what does purposeful time in the office mean? Like, why would it be better for me to have that meeting in the office and have that meeting virtually? What are we gaining by being together? And that question is harder, I think, sometimes when you were used to being maybe a Boston, US based team. That's somewhat of an easier question when you're a global team. And so we've got a mix within our organization. It's hard to say I'm going to fly everybody in from around the world to have a meeting. So virtual was the way we did a lot of things. If you spend a lot of time in Boston and you have teams in Boston, to reframe, does it still make sense for them all to be here for that? What more did we get out of that than doing it virtually? And so I think our role is the challenger role of sort of challenging assumptions and making sure that we're thinking through the implications of our decisions and the connection points to other parts of the organization where maybe there's similar work being done and leaders thinking differently. How do we bring all of that together so that we get comfortable with where we land? But more about giving framework and support and challenging and thinking and bringing fresh ideas and outside perspectives than being the dictator or owner of exactly how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's where my head is going as well. But as you're talking, Jen, the other side that I come to is if we stay in that 6 months out from now state, what do these changes and adaptations mean for recruitment for us, bringing in talent? And I'd like to put a little twist on that, which is now for the first time ever in the history of work, we have 5 generations in the workplace. And with 5 generations in the workplace, we have almost 5 distinctly different expectations of how work will be done. So, Willie, let me turn to you. When you think about the future of recruitment and talent acquisition, talent retention, this is all stuff that keeps all 4 of us up at night. How do we look at the future in terms of the marketplace saying, hey, I'm only going to take this job if it's 100% remote, or I just graduated college and this is my expectation. What are your thoughts?
If I tell you, then I'm retired because I'll write a book and sell it. I'm not sure, right? So we're actually having this conversation at HRLT last week, or I think it was last week, with our talent team, right, and our talent leader around the changing expectations of the workforce. Not only just those that are just graduating, but given the situation we are in, we've got mid-career folks who are saying, "Hey, I've been able to do this, for the last 14 months." Why do I need to come back in the office to do X, Y, and Z, or to get promoted? Or if I take this promotion, does that mean I need to come back in the office? And so it's a talent acquisition question. There's an internal talent mobility question that we're also trying to answer as well. And so I think, again, it goes back to what we're talking, we need to be flexible. There's just some roles that have to be in the office. It's hard to say that I'm a bench scientist and you could be a telecommuter, right? That dog don't hunt, as they say in Indiana, right? That you can't do that from here. However, if you are, a finance director, could that job be remote? And are we recruiting for someone who is more than willing to, to do a telecommute into the office? And so I think we're going to have to kind of pull up and be a little bit more flexible as we think about talent, whether it is, right off campus, or if it's truly kind of mid-career or senior executive talent who says, look, I live in Boston and I'll come to New Jersey, 4 days a week, but I'm not moving. Okay, the work is in central New Jersey. And so it's gonna have to be just flexible. Our approach is gonna have to be flexible. And we're trying to solve that now with our discussions with our talent team and our leaders. And our leaders are actually saying the same thing, which is surprising to me a little bit, which like, look, that person can be in Seattle. The person doesn't need to be in central New Jersey. And we're like, oh, wait a minute, time out. That's not kind of what that has not been our approach. And so it is managing the expectation of the leaders, but also the talent that's out there as well.
Yeah.
Such an opportunity though, if you can capitalize on the flexibility piece, you can get the best talent from around the world. You have to change the way you think about where that role needs to be. And I totally get, there's roles that absolutely have to be in the office. Willie, you were describing some, but there are plenty of roles that have been successful not being in the office right now. And are they okay saying, you know what, I'm gonna hire somebody in some other country to do this work because they're the best, in the world on this, and they're not moving and I don't need them to move.
We're having the exact same discussion, Jen, and the way BMS is organized, our regions are all sitting in central New Jersey. So our head of what we call Intercon, our international markets, sits in New Jersey. Our head of what we call major markets sits in New Jersey. And there's a debate or discussion around the best person that we found for this role to lead a regional role is sitting in France, and she won't move. Are we willing to give that, are we going to test this, right? And have the regional lead sit outside the US? And we haven't answered that question, but that's the question on the table. And then what does that mean for other regional leads, right? And the regional roles. And so I'm not sure where we'll go, but that clearly is on the table right now. The best person that we found for the role is sitting outside the US and is not able to move at this time.
And if you layer on diversity and organizations, so many organizations are trying to figure out how to become a more diverse organization. If you are able to cast a wider net, you're able to go to a different market to hire people and have different flexibility options. It opens up your candidate slate significantly, but you've got to be able to do that, and you've got to be able to figure out how to get them engaged and connected and all of the pieces that go along with that. So absolutely. I think we're probably all spending a lot of time talking about that.
Willie, the way you started your answer is something I've been trying very hard to share with staff, which is, folks, there's a lot of I don't knows in my world right now. We don't know yet. There's a lot of waiting and seeing to see where that would be. Deb, if I may ask you, one thing that folks will ask, especially with a global organization like yours, is, well, and then this question came up in the Q&A, and that's why I'm asking it. If I telecommute for ADP and Deb, you do not, and I happen to telecommute in Indiana, as Willie said, but you have to go in to the office in New York City. If we're in the same job, how does that affect compensation? You have an added cost involved in the coming in and going, because let's say your manager expected it 1 day a week, and how do we maintain some sort of equity in that regard? Any thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I had this conversation with our head of total rewards, just to kind of ideate, right? Have to think about it. And, I think there's a couple things, I think we all read the headlines, like in the beginning of this, they were like, well, if somebody goes and moves to a lower cost location, we're gonna change their pay. We're just gonna change their pay. But that doesn't work with what Jen was talking about, right? Going where the talent is. So we have to think about that. Now we have geographic structures, I'm sure many people do with where you are, but the point is we have to think about that. We also have to think more specifically and deliberately about pay equity. Because if you have a man, woman, if it's, minority, we have to think through these things because frankly, I want to pay for the talent, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing it fairly relative to everybody else who's doing that work. And those, I think to Willie's point, those are questions we're starting to answer for ourselves now, and it will continue to evolve because the talent market will dictate. There'll be laws coming through too, because I don't know if anybody does business in Colorado, but even if you open up a job and if you open it up, it could be anywhere. When you open it up in Colorado, you have to have salary ranges that reflect the anywhere, right? So we're going to see, by the way, that's the last of my legal anything. So I hope there's no lawyers on the call because there's no way I can answer another legal question. But the point is, it's really around, we have to let that talent market evolve, that talent market dictate. I think we're going to learn a lot.
Yeah.
To your point, Tahsin, in 6 months, we're going to learn a lot.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also another thing that the pandemic has laid bare amongst so many things is the traditional expectations around women at home versus in the workplace and how that balance would be. So in fact, a question that came into the Q&A is, how do you encourage in your workforce some sense of understanding of balance between traditional roles versus a future role where you're going to, taking care of children, taking care of needs of the household, being at work. We're coming into this new sort of triad of what that right balance is going to be. So for example, at the Rutgers University Foundation, while we were in the office, we were very proud to have, because we're 76% female, we're very proud to have a mother's room in the office, and then a bit of a variable schedule which for those that need to drop off kids in the morning versus pick up in the morning. What are you thinking about in terms of families for the future and the balance of maintaining families? I mean, I have a 5-month-old. I have to think about daycare in the morning and pick up. So do you think that'll come automatically with the future of flexibility, or are we going to step up more for families?
So maybe I'll start.
Sure.
I feel so there's a lot in the press around women through all of this exiting the exiting organizations, exiting the workforce because it's just too much on top of everything. I mean, I hope that is because of the crunch of being home, trying to work, and your daycare was closed, and homeschooling and all of the things that were happening. And I hope that evolves. But even during that time, we tried really hard to be a voice for those people. And I'm one of them. I have a 12-year-old. I had it easy because I have one 12-year-old here who he was doing school from home, but that's different than having, a 3-year-old running around, or a 5-month-old, or sort of, and no nanny or anything, or daycare to put them in. So we just, we gave people time off that needed time off. I mean, we called it COVID time, and we helped them, sort of have the time to do the things that they needed to do. And I've been purposeful to the point where my son won't come to my office anymore because I was like, come say hello. I wanted people to understand it's okay. I mean, there's a whole lot going on behind that door. If you had any idea what kind of mess I was dealing with out there, and sort of put it all out there because it's okay. And so, we're trying to message it from a leadership perspective. We're trying to put policies and programs in place to help people have the freedom to be able to manage the things that they need to do. And being a global organization, we work, I might have a call at 11 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning because I'm trying to connect with people in Asia. So that doesn't mean I have to be on 9 to 5 at my computer too. So how do we create, get your work done, flexible work arrangements that work with my family needs that might be different than what any one of you need at a certain period of time. That's the challenge, I think, is like that mindset shift to help people figure out what balance is. And I sometimes say work-life fit instead of work-life balance, because it's not always in balance. It's how you figure out how to fit it all in.
I love it. That's absolutely true. The balance sets this expectation onto yourself that you must be able to find balance if given one or two or three utilities, but ultimately it's a dance, and you get there. Allow me to let the audience know a little bit about each of you. So, Deb, if I start with you, what's in the last 14 months, what's happened in your in either work or life, up to you, that gave you the confidence that we're making it through this, we're going to be okay? Is there sort of a moment you look back on and it puts a big smile on your face, just to look at the positive side of what the last 14 months has brought us?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was happy when I figured out all the restaurants to order food from. I was super happy in the beginning for that. I would say, and I started with leading with heart, and I talked about that, and we talk a lot about empathy and compassion. And what I think what I'm most hopeful about is that every time I read something about the companies that are represented here, many companies outside of here, the leaders have all risen to the challenge to be human beings, right? To be human first, because that's who we are, right? And to, Jen and Willie were talking about this, like, people were going through so much we don't see, right? And so, we talked about leading with heart and giving people scripts so they can have conversations, because it wasn't conversations necessarily we had pre-COVID, but now we have to, because your life is here, right? So I have hope. That's what makes me feel good. I have hope because I hear this universal voice of, let's take care of each other and let's get through this together, and we will get through it together. And as long as I keep hearing that as the loudest voice, a lot of other voices down there, I ignore those. We hear that the loudest voice, that gives me hope every day.
Thank you, Deb. Willie, Jen?
Sure. I'll pick up where Deb left off. I think from a work perspective, how I knew we were going to make it through, even as senior leaders, we look to our leaders to lead, right? And our executive leadership team, our CEO and his direct reports, they all leaned in. And our CEO is very similar. He would prefer to keep his kind of personal life personal, right? He's quiet. He's a great leader. I love Giovanni and the leadership that he brings to BMS. But I think it was on our first town hall after, we had to work from home, and, he usually is in a suit jacket and he's in a regular shirt, and started talking about his family. And he started talking about the things that he was going through, and being, his kids were in Italy, and he and his wife were here, and he communicated how he was feeling and the impact of stay at home, the pandemic had on his family. And the leadership team that reports to him all did the same thing over time, right? And so you saw your leaders be vulnerable, but also lead, right? And tell you and show that we're going to get through this. So and we were doing this, trying to merge 3 companies, right? We had a couple of integrations going on, and just the confidence that they had from a business perspective that we would get through it. Personally, my wife and I are still sleeping in the same room, so I'm glad, that was a true indicator that we were going to get through, get through this pandemic. And our kids are healthy. My oldest son, my middle child, graduates from college next week. He made it through the pandemic as well, and being in Texas. So it's just kind of the personal things as a family, right? That we all made it through, knock on wood, we've all made it through this healthy, mentally healthy as well. and relatively in good spirits. And so they just, the sun is shining, and it just feels like, we're on the back end of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, maybe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jen, go ahead, please.
I looked at it in terms of silver linings. I live in New Jersey, and I was commuting to Boston a lot. And if I wasn't commuting to Boston, I was somewhere around the world, spending time with our colleagues in 15 different countries for my part of the business. And so to get off of that treadmill, put my suitcase away, and actually be present with my family has been amazing. And it's been challenging, but I was here, with my son going through all of the challenges of being an only child here, and not connecting with people, and my husband having a health issue, and I was here. And so I look at it and I say silver linings, and appreciate coming off of the treadmill. I don't want to get on the treadmill to the same extent that it was before. I have personal passion around it. I don't think I'm any less effective and maybe I'm more productive because I'm not schlepping through airports and back and forth. But I miss the personal connections and interactions. I miss breaking bread with people. We try to replicate that, but there are things that we're still going to need to come together for, because it makes you, connect and bond in a different way. And that's what we've sort of shifted our thinking to. What is the purposeful times that we come together? From a work perspective, I feel like I went into this with a lot of pressure. I felt a lot of pressure of these are like career defining moments from a talent perspective. You either get this right or you get it really wrong and you don't come back from it. And so every decision we were making at the beginning of COVID, and what are we giving people, and how are we helping in this country, and how are we showing up over here, and how's a leader, how are we getting our leaders down in the organization to understand the spirit of what we're trying to do, so that they're implementing things that don't break that spirit, because those are the things that end up on a newspaper somewhere that isn't an alignment with what you're trying to do. But what a really amazing opportunity for the talent organization to lean in hard and help the organization really show up in a way. And I was so incredibly proud of every single decision that the organization has made that really was about living our values and putting people first. And so those defining moments lift you up when you're feeling beat up and tired from everything that we're going through. So I'm certainly trying to find all of the silver linings.
Thank you, Jen. That's very meaningful. In fact, it reminds me of, there was a moment during this pandemic, I was standing in a park. It was 6:30 at night. I was on the phone with 3 of my executive team colleagues. We're trying to decide how to roll out furloughs, which we had to do for the state, which put us right on the edge of having to do layoffs, which we luckily didn't need to do. And I had that moment where I was like, this decision that I'm about to make is either going to make or break me, and I need to make sure I look through all the numbers to make the right call on this one. So let's all end with an equal sense of sort of opportunity for the future. Just gonna, for the one time, I'm gonna go around with each of you and ask, what are you most, as a chief talent officer, what are you most looking forward to about the workplace in the next 12 months? And I mean that sort of in a strategic way. Frankly, if you were to ask me, I'm going to steal the answer from one of you who said, oh, Deb, you said it, which is we're going to diversify much faster if we show flexibility for a future talent marketplace. So I'm excited to see what that could be. And if Deb, I stole your one, let me start with yours. let you start.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily lead talent as a role, because I lead transformation, change, and communications, but I am HR for HR, so they can't avoid me, although they can try. Yeah, I mean, I think from a talent standpoint, we all have a challenge, because we need to make sure that the communities inside our buildings, to the extent we get back in buildings, reflect our communities outside the buildings. And, that's just something we have to continue to drive towards at every level of the organization, right? Board, leadership, all levels of the organization. So I'm actually kind of excited. We have a reframing opportunity with how we're looking at flexibility and our talent marketplace and our talent pools and globalization. We have an opportunity. So I'm pretty excited about that. You can imagine that I've been at ADP for 33 years, and I've either hired you, I've hired your boss, or I hired your best friend at work. So we'll keep doing that for a while.
Thank you, Deb. Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started off the session talking about the opportunity that all of this presents in terms of coming out better as an organization. One of the things that we've been spending time on is getting employee sentiment, more so than even more so. I mean, we did a lot with employee engagement surveys and ENPS. We're doing pulse surveys through COVID. And we've been working on something called Moments That Matter, and really honing in on what are the key things that are meaningful to our employees, what moments, what touch points within an employee life cycle are really meaningful, so that we can really invest our time and prioritize what's going to be impactful. And so taking that data and figuring out what those moments that matter are in the new sort of challenged our thinking, flexible organization, and the opportunity that presents from a DEI perspective. I just think the sky's the limit for figuring out what our next great things are for the organization.
Thank you, Jen. Willie, in the last minute that you have, you close us up.
We are truly at a pivot point, right? And we can't go to the Wayback Machine. So I think it is incredibly exciting over the next 12 months of what the possibility lives, right? What's out there for us from a talent, a D&I perspective, a flexibility. There's just so much, I think, opportunity, and how do we harness that to best support our workforce? And when I say workforce, it's kind of broader than in, kind of quote unquote, your blue badge employees, right? Workforce is your contingent workers, your partners. So it's really, how do we engage our total workforce as we think about the next iteration of what is from a business perspective? I think that's incredibly exciting, and an incredible exciting time to be in business and frankly in HR.
Yeah. I completely agree with all of you. And I think also conversations like this are new and exciting to have the ability to share notes and figure out what's the best thing to do for our workforces and the humans that work for us. So for that, I'm grateful for the audience who've joined us. Thank you. I tried to get to as many of your questions as I could, but now you know us. Now you know your fellow Rutgers graduates. Reach out. LinkedIn is the world we live in. And otherwise, Jen, Deb, Willie, can't thank you enough for your time, and go RU.